Sam thought freedom was something you either had or you didn't, even when everything else is gone, until you realize it's also a survival strategy. This is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And in this video, we're going to unpack how Frankl survived the camps without losing his humanity, what he learned about why people break, why others endure, and how to build meaning in your life without waiting for perfect conditions. We're going to cover every major part of the book, so by the end, you'll feel like you actually absorbed the core of it. Not just a few famous lines. Sam is the kind of guy who tries to be realistic. He's not dramatic. He doesn't post motivational quotes. He just wants a normal life that feels steady. A job that doesn't drain him, relationships that don't feel like a test. A mind that isn't constantly fighting itself. He keeps running into the same invisible wall. When life is easy, he's fine. When life gets hard, he tells himself he'll get through it. But he gets smaller inside. He starts reacting. He starts snapping at people. He starts numbing out at night. He doesn't even feel like he's choosing it. It feels automatic. That's why Frankl hits so hard. Because this book isn't saying, life is fair, stay positive. It's saying, life can become unbearable. It can strip you down. It can humiliate you. It can take the future you thought you had. And you still have one place where you can choose. Not control, not comfort, not outcomes. Choice. Frankl's story begins in the most extreme environment imaginable, the Nazi concentration camps. And the first thing he teaches you is something most people don't want to hear, and that's both a miracle and a warning. You can also get used to a life that isn't really living. You can adapt to misery. You can normalize numbness. You can learn to tolerate a version of yourself you don't respect, and you won't even notice it happening. Until one day you wake up and think, when did I become this person? Frankl describes the mental journey of prisoners in phases. And even if you've never experienced anything close to what he did, these phases map onto normal life more than you'd expect. The first phase is shock. Shock isn't just fear. It's the brain trying to compute a reality it can't absorb yet. Imagine walking into a room and the rules of being human are suddenly different. Your name doesn't matter. Your history doesn't matter. So your personality doesn't matter. Your body is inspected like equipment. Your dignity is treated like a joke. Or going surreal. Frankl writes about that strange mental haze where you're watching your own life like it's happening to someone else, except you can't wake up. And here's the part that's uncomfortable. Because it's true. When shock hits, you don't become heroic. You become basic. You become a creature trying to survive the next hour. Sam learned a small version of that during a winter where everything piled up at once. It wasn't a camp, obviously, life. His dad got sick, not a little sick. Sick enough that hospital visits became a normal part of the week. Sam's job started pressuring him because he'd leave early. His bills didn't pause. His sleep disappeared. And one night, he was standing in the pharmacy aisle staring at cold medicine, reading the same label 3 times. And none of it was landing. He wasn't crying. He wasn't panicking. He was blank. A woman walked past him and said, "Excuse me," and he didn't even move. Not because he was rude, because his brain wasn't fully online. That's shock. And in that phase, you start learning what matters most to your nervous system. It isn't inspiration. It isn't meaning. It's reduction. Your brain starts cutting everything down to the smallest possible job description. Get through today. Something people don't talk about because it feels wrong to say out loud. When death is everywhere, sometimes you stop fearing it. Not because you become brave, but because fear burns too much energy and your mind is trying to conserve fuel. It's like a phone switching to low power mode. The screen dims, background apps close, everything slows down. Your mind does the same thing. Apathy. Apathy is not laziness. Apathy is emotional self-defense. It's the heart putting on armor because feeling fully would destroy you. Frankl describes how the prisoners began to blunt their reactions. Horrible sights became normal. Cruelty became routine. You'd see someone collapse. And your first emotion wasn't grief, it was calculation. Will I be punished if I stop? Do I have the strength to carry him? If I get involved, do I risk my own survival? That's not evil, that's starvation logic. A starving person thinks in a tunnel. That's what prolonged hardship does. It narrows the world. It's like trying to drive through a snowstorm with a windshield that's fogged up. But your vision is reduced to a few feet. You stop thinking about the destination, you're just trying not to crash. Survival, food, warmth, rest, avoiding punishment, holding on to any advantage, and this is where, even in that apathy, something surprising happens. Some people's inner life deepens. Think about that. When the outer world becomes a cage, the inner world can become either a grave or a refuge. Viktor Frankl talks about prisoners who survived by traveling in their minds, remembering a loved one, replaying a conversation, imagining a future moment, rehearsing a lecture they might someday give. And this wasn't fantasy. It was medicine. Because when the body is trapped, the mind needs somewhere to breathe. Frankl's most famous idea shows up here. He says that meaning can come from three places: from creating or doing something, from experiencing something or loving someone, and from the attitude you take toward unavoidable suffering. That last one is the one people misunderstand. Frankl is not saying, suffering is good. He's saying, when suffering cannot be removed, your response becomes your last freedom. That response can be dignity, it can be courage, it can be humor, it can be faith, it can be loyalty to your own values, it can be collapse. And Frankl is brutally honest. Many people did collapse. He describes how hope is not a nice extra. Hope is biological. When people lost their sense of future, they often got sick. Their bodies followed the mind. Because when the mind decides there's nothing left, the body stops negotiating. Now, before we go further, let's make this personal. Because you might be thinking, yeah, but my life isn't a camp, so what do I do with this? Here's what. You have modern versions of the same mental traps. The shock phase shows up when life hits you with something you didn't plan for. A breakup, a job loss, a diagnosis in the family, a betrayal, a sudden financial hit. The apathy phase shows up when stress becomes your default setting, when you stop being fully present, when you start living on autopilot, when you stop caring about things you used to care about. And that's where the danger is, because apathy feels like stability. It feels like, I'm fine. It's your heart going quiet to avoid pain. Sam went through this after his dad stabilized, but the damage was still there. The hospital visits slowed down. The crisis cooled off. And everyone expected Sam to bounce back. But he didn't. He got home from work, sat on the couch, and stared at nothing for long stretches. His phone would light up with messages and he'd ignore them. Not because he hated people, but because answering felt like lifting a weight. Even food tasted flat. Music felt like noise. Plans felt like chores. That's apathy. And if you don't recognize it, you start building a life around it. You start calling it your personality. You start saying, I'm just tired. I'm just not motivated. You're not missing motivation. You're missing meaning. Because meaning doesn't just make you happy. Meaning makes you endure. Frankl tells story after story of small choices that revealed a person's inner freedom. Sometimes it was a man sharing a piece of bread. Sometimes it was someone comforting another prisoner. Making a joke in a place where jokes should not exist. And those moments weren't small. They were proof that a person is more than his circumstances. It's like a candle in a blackout. It doesn't light up the whole city, but it proves darkness isn't total. The camp created two types of prisoners. Those who became like animals, focused only on self-preservation, even when it cost them. This is where the book becomes a mirror, not a history lesson. Or trade it for convenience. You can be rude because you're stressed. You can lie because it's easier. You can treat people like obstacles because you're busy. Life is hard. Frankl would say, yes, life is hard. That's why your attitude matters more, not less. Now here's where it gets interesting. Frankl was a psychiatrist, so he wasn't only observing suffering, he was observing how the mind responds to suffering. He noticed that pain alone wasn't the only thing crushing people. Meaninglessness crushed them. When someone couldn't attach their suffering to a purpose, they dissolved. They could endure almost anyhow. This is often paraphrased, but the idea is very specific. The why could be a person waiting for them. The why could be a mission. The why could be unfinished work. The why could be a promise. Frankl describes how he survived by holding onto images of his wife, by speaking to her in his mind, by imagining her face. even when he couldn't touch it. Love became a place to stand. That's important because most people think love is a feeling. Frankl shows it can be an anchor. Think of it like rock climbing. Your hands can slip, your legs can shake, your breath can go wild. You can keep moving. Meaning is that anchor. Frankl also did something else that's easy to miss. He held on to his work. He had been developing ideas about meaning even before the camps. And he kept thinking, if I survive, I need to teach this. At one point, he even tried to reconstruct a lost manuscript in his head. Imagine that. Your body is starving, your world is collapsing, and you're still writing in your mind. Why would someone do that? Because purpose is a reason to remain a person. Now, the third phase Frankl describes is what happens after liberation. And this might be the most surprising part of the whole book, because you'd expect liberation to be pure joy. It wasn't like that. Many prisoners didn't feel happy right away. They felt unreal. They felt numb. They felt like the freedom was a dream that could be taken away any second. They had to relearn how to feel. Think about that. When your nervous system has been braced for danger for too long, it can't instantly relax just because the danger ends. It's like a tight fist that's been clenched for hours, and it still trembles. It still aches. It doesn't trust the release. Frankl describes depersonalization. The world looks strange. The sky looks too wide. Colors look almost fake. Joy arrives in sparks, not waves. And then there's another dark truth. Some people, after being oppressed, became oppressors. They felt justified. They felt entitled to revenge. They felt like cruelty was now their right. Frankl doesn't romanticize survival. He shows how trauma can deform a person if it isn't integrated. Moral and spiritual damage, because when pressure releases suddenly, you can explode in ways you didn't expect. Sam went through his own version of this after a rough year. Not anything like Frankl's suffering, but enough to change him. He had been holding himself together for months, working, caring for family, swallowing stress, being the reliable guy. Then one day, the pressure finally released. The crisis ended, the schedule opened, and instead of feeling grateful, Sam got angry. He snapped at a friend over something small. He drove aggressively. He started judging everyone who hadn't struggled like he had. And later that night, he sat in his kitchen holding a glass of water, feeling embarrassed. He thought, why am I acting like this? Because suffering doesn't automatically make you wise. It just reveals you. Meaning is what transforms it. So what is logotherapy, the second part of the book? Frankl calls his approach logotherapy, and the word comes from the idea of meaning. His core belief is simple, but it changes everything. The primary human drive is not pleasure. It's not power. It's meaning. That's the will to meaning. And if you don't have it, you don't just feel sad. You feel empty. You feel bored. You feel restless. You feel like nothing matters, even when life looks fine from the outside. Frankl describes something called the existential vacuum. That hollow feeling people get when they're not oriented toward a purpose. And in modern life, this vacuum gets filled with distractions. Noise, consumption, status games, constant stimulation. But none of it satisfies, it just occupies. It's like chewing gum when you're hungry. Your mouth moves, but your body still knows. Our meaning is nourishment. Frankl also introduces an idea called new dynamics, which basically says mental health isn't about being perfectly calm all the time. It's about having a tension, a healthy tension, between who you are and what you're responsible for. Most people think tension is bad. They want zero discomfort. Frankl says actually some tension is good. It's the tension of reaching, the tension of becoming, the tension of having a mission that pulls you forward. If you remove that tension, you don't become peaceful. You become flat, you become bored, you become impulsive, you start chasing cheap excitement. It's like a bow and arrow. If the string has no tension, the arrow goes nowhere. Tension isn't the enemy. It's what creates direction. Now, Frankl is careful here. He's not telling people to suffer for fun. He's saying, don't confuse comfort with meaning. Comfort is a soft chair. Meaning is a reason to stand up. Logotherapy also flips a question most people ask. Most people ask, what is the meaning of life? What does life expect of me? That's a huge shift, because asking what is the meaning of life can become a philosophical trap. You can spin forever. But asking what life expects of me forces responsibility. It forces action. It forces you to look at your specific situation and say, what is my task right now? Frankl says meaning is unique and personal. It's not one universal answer you download. It's something you discover in the demands of the moment. Sometimes the demand is to love someone well. Sometimes it's to do your work with excellence. Sometimes it's to endure a hardship without becoming bitter. Sometimes it's to correct a mistake and become better. Your key, and no one can turn it for you. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but how does this help with real anxiety, real fear, real pressure? Frankl offers two techniques that are almost shockingly practical. The first is paradoxical intention. This is one of those ideas that sounds weird until you try it. And instead, you approach it with a kind of controlled humor and willingness. When you're terrified of something happening, you often create more fear by resisting. You tense up. You monitor yourself. You try to force control. And that effort becomes the problem. Frankl noticed this with certain anxieties. The more someone tried to avoid a symptom, the more they triggered it. To lean in, not dangerously, not recklessly, but with an attitude that breaks the fear loop. It's like when you're trying to fall asleep and you keep thinking, I have to sleep, I have to sleep. That pressure keeps you awake. But if you say, fine, I'll stay awake, whatever, your body relaxes and sleep becomes possible. The second technique is dereflection. Dereflection means shifting your attention away from obsessive self-focus and towards something meaningful outside yourself. Because many forms of anxiety are amplified by constant internal monitoring. How am I doing? Do I look weird? Am I failing? Why do I feel this? What if it gets worse? It becomes a spotlight turned inward that burns your own skin. Dereflection turns the spotlight outward, toward a task, toward a person, toward service, toward purpose. Frankl would say, the more you chase happiness directly, the more it runs. Happiness is a byproduct of meaning, not the target. You don't grab it with your hands, you create the conditions where it arrives. Like trying to hold water. If you squeeze, it slips. If you cup gently, it stays. Let's connect all of this back to Sam because this is where it becomes real. Sam was good at goals. He could write plans, he could make schedules, he could be disciplined for a while, but he kept burning out. And one day, he noticed something. He wasn't exhausted from effort. He was exhausted from pointless effort. He was doing tasks that didn't feel connected to anything. He was saying yes to things he didn't respect. He was reacting to other people's expectations instead of responding to his own values. So he tried a Frankl experiment. For 14 days, every morning, before looking at his phone, he asked one question. What does life expect of me today? Not what do I want, not what do I feel like, not what will impress people. What is my responsibility today? And here's the crazy part. It changed his energy, but they're also clarifying. On day 3, the answer was simple. Call his dad before work. Not later, before. On day 6, it was stop avoiding a difficult conversation with his manager. Speak calmly, be honest, ask for what he needed. On day 9, it was help a friend who had been quietly struggling. Not with advice, with presence. Show up. Sam wasn't suddenly blissful, but he was oriented. He felt like he was walking with a compass instead of stumbling in fog. Frankl says this is the difference between people who survive hardship and people who are destroyed by it. It isn't toughness, it's direction. And direction comes from meaning. Frankl also makes a crucial distinction about suffering. If suffering can be removed, remove it. If you can change a situation, change it. Meaning is not an excuse to stay in a harmful environment. But if suffering is unavoidable, then it becomes a question. What kind of person will I be inside it? This is where Frankl introduces the idea he later calls tragic optimism, which appears in the postscript. Tragic optimism is the ability to say yes to life in spite of tragedy. Not because tragedy is good, even after loss. He breaks tragedy into 3 unavoidable realities: pain, guilt, and death. And he argues that humans can transform each one. Pain can become achievement or inner growth. Guilt can become a reason to change. Death can become a reason to live responsibly now. That's heavy. but it's also empowering because it means your life is not only meaningful when things go well, it can be meaningful when things go wrong. Some of the deepest meanings are forged in the hardest moments, like steel and fire. Now, let's be careful here. This is not saying chase suffering, don't waste it. If you're forced to carry something, carry it with dignity. Carry it with purpose. Carry it in a way that keeps your soul intact. Sam had a moment that made this real. He was visiting his dad on a quiet afternoon. The TV was on low. The room smelled like soup. His dad was tired but calm. Sam asked, "Do you ever get scared?" His dad paused, then said, "Yeah. I want you to remember me as someone who handled it well, not perfectly." Well, and Sam felt something shift in his chest. That was meaning. Not a grand mission, not a motivational poster, a simple responsibility to show up with character. Frankl would say that meaning often shows up like that, small, specific, personal. It's the way you speak to someone when you're tired. It's the way you hold your values when nobody's watching. It's the way you refuse to become cruel just because you've been hurt. It's the way you continue to love even when love risks loss. And this is where Frankl's most famous line comes alive without needing to be quoted. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is your power to choose. Most people live like that space doesn't exist. They feel anger and they become it. They feel fear and they obey it. They feel hurt and they pass it on. No, there is a space. And that space is your last freedom. The guards can take your clothes, they can take your food, they can take your name, unless you hand it over. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but how do I actually grow that space in normal life? You grow it by practicing it when the stakes are small. Pause. 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 That pause is the gym. Every pause is a rep. It's like strengthening a muscle that most people never train. And as it gets stronger, you start experiencing a new kind of freedom. Not freedom from problems. Freedom inside problems. Sam tested this at work after a stressful meeting. His manager gave him feedback that felt unfair. Sam felt the heat rising. His mind started writing a speech. He wanted to argue. Instead, he used the Frankl space. He took one breath. He looked down at his notes. He asked himself, what does life expect of me right now? And the answer wasn't win. It was be professional, be clear, protect your dignity. So he said, I hear you. Can we clarify expectations so I can meet them? The room changed. Not because the manager became nice, but because Sam didn't surrender his inner freedom to the moment. And later, walking to his car, Sam felt something rare. Self-respect. Frankl would say self-respect is built when you act in alignment with meaning, not mood. Mood is a weather system. Meaning is architecture. Mood changes. Meaning holds. Now, there's one more idea Frankl slips into the book that's easy to miss but deeply important. He warns against the pursuit of success as the main aim. Because when you aim at success directly, you become anxious and self-centered. But when you aim at meaning, success can follow as a side effect. He says something similar about happiness. The more you chase it, the more it recedes. Happiness happens when you forget yourself in something meaningful. That's self-transcendence. Meaning is often found when you stop making your life about you. That sounds counterintuitive, especially in a culture that says focus on yourself, treat yourself, protect your peace. Frankl isn't saying ignore yourself. He's saying you are not fulfilled by being the center of your own universe. You're fulfilled by devotion to something beyond you. A person, a cause, a craft, a value. And when you live that way, you suffer differently. You still feel pain, but it has a place to go. It becomes part of a story instead of a random injury. It's like carrying a heavy backpack. If you're walking nowhere, it feels pointless and unbearable. If you're walking towards someone you love, you can carry more than you thought. Frankl's book is not easy, but it's not depressing either. It's a brutal proof of the human spirit's ability to choose. And that's why it's still relevant now, even in a completely different world, because modern suffering is often quieter. It's not barbed wire. It's emptiness. It's not forced labor. It's meaningless labor. It's not starvation. It's constant stimulation that still leaves you hungry. Meaning is still the answer, not because it fixes everything, and sometimes even beautiful. Here are a few things you can start doing right now based on what we just covered. First, start your day with Frankl's question. What does life expect of me today? Keep it simple. One responsibility, one act of courage, one act of love, one task that matters. Second, practice the space. Pick one small trigger you deal with daily, like impatience, criticism, or anxiety. When it hits, pause for one breath and name your choice before you act. That single breath is you reclaiming freedom. Third, create meaning through contribution. Choose one thing you do each week that benefits someone else without needing credit. Send the message. Make the call. Help quietly. Meaning grows when your life isn't only about your comfort. Fourth, if you're stuck in the existential vacuum, stop asking what you feel like doing and start asking what's worth doing. Mood will argue. Meaning will guide. Treat meaning like a compass, not a reward. Fifth, when suffering shows up and you can't remove it, decide what kind of person you want to be inside it. Not perfect, just aligned. That decision will protect your spirit even when circumstances don't. That's it for this video. I hope it was useful and gave you something real to think about. Thanks for watching and have a great day.